Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are talking about Blight League and whether or not it ought to go core or not. So I asked a few days ago exactly what people's thoughts were on Blight via our wonderful YouTube poll suggestion feature, and this was the response that we got back. We got back 285 votes, so thanks so much to everybody who participated in the poll and voting, and we only put two options up. I've gotten a lot of feedback over the last couple of days about, hey, Iron, why didn't you put like a third option in here? Why didn't you put a meh option? So you'll see some of those comments down below, but I wanted to interact with this as a discussion topic relatively early on in the league, and then we'll address it again later on in the league, of course, as we get more news and thoughts from Grinding Gear Games throughout 3.8 Blight League over whether or not Blight is going core, and then how should we react to that and if that's good in its implementation. But today I wanted to get early impressions of whether or not people loved or hated Blight, and that's why I didn't include a third option. I just wanted folks to vote and to put their vote in either of these two camps. So we've got 69% of the vote, nice, saying I love Blight, and we've got 31% of the vote saying they hate Blight. Now we've got a bunch of folks here dropping comments that we'll go through here during today's discussion. Of course, at any point in time, you can leave us a comment down below on this video, and those of you who are new to the channel, you can like, subscribe, and ding the bell for more videos just like this one. So first off, Mr. C says, I love the concept and hate the implementation. This is something that I have been reading across the board on forums as well as Reddit, as well as a couple of different PoE discords, that a lot of people are saying, hey, GGG had a great idea here with tower defense, but maybe with the implementations of portals, as well as maybe a lack of waves, as well as maybe a lack of consistency in the difficulty of challenges. Sometimes, you know, if you've got, let's say, a Blight map or a Blight encounter that you've got, maybe the rare monsters that are coming through have 0 proximity shields. Maybe sometimes they've got a bunch of proximity shields. Maybe sometimes there's a boss that comes through and just simply one-shots your build, which, of course, is a hallmark feature of Path of Exile at this point in time in the history of the game. Stuff is just going to one-shot you left and right. But I think this is pretty much a pretty popular sentiment. Loving the concept, but hating the implementation. That has really become the story of PoE, at least thus far this year. Moving on, ILA Labs Taco Mage says, it's not awful, it's just not super inspired. I kind of felt that way about Legion 2. Honestly, I liked late stage synthesis more than either of these two because while synthesis was random, it was easy to engage with, not counting item synthesis, which was a train wreck. The irony here is the thing that I loved about synthesis was the itemization of synthesis. I actually personally didn't necessarily enjoy the mechanic of building your map, as it were, on your synthesis, the synthesis mechanic in that way. I loved that rares were good again and crafting was accessible to a lot of different people. I thought that was really cool about synthesis. But he continues, Blight is difficult to engage with because the Blighted map drops so rarely, and Legion is medium difficulty of engaging because you have to gather all the shards, and even when you do gather them, if you don't have a strong party, it's more beneficial to just sell them anyway. Blight is not a lot like Legion in that way. Blight is a lot like Legion in that way, easy to engage on a map-to-map basis, but time-consuming to engage with the central premise. I think if Blighted maps were more common, I'd feel better about the league overall. The rareness of maps, coupled with the opportunity cost of failing a Blighted map with a bad layout, just kills my enthusiasm to engage with the mechanic. My last Blighted map spawned 3 boss nodes only a few inches away from the pump with only a couple of nearby towers. That felt like a slap in the face, as there was no way I was ever going to be able to defend that, and that's a map I won't be seeing again for a good long while. Heck, if I could use oils to inflict Blight on a map rather than have to rely on random drops, all the better. Just gate that anointment so that certain tiers of maps require certain tiers of oil to blight them, then scale the rewards accordingly. I've got all this oil laying around not doing anything. Let me at least blight some white maps so that I can engage with the core league mechanic. I think that is by far the best suggestion that I have seen on any discussion thus far on how to improve Blight. Like, we've got all these oils that are floating around that are low tier oils. Let us combine them to a certain threshold so that way it's not just, you know, blighted maps all the time everywhere. Let them combine them to a certain threshold, and then you can apply it to white maps, and another threshold, and you can apply them to yellow maps, and another threshold, and you can apply them to red maps, right? Maybe even make it so that way God forbid, right? There have been some complaints about the endgame bosses or lack of an endgame boss that has been introduced with the Blight League. Maybe we could oil anoint our Shaper, or maybe we could oil anoint our Zeri, or maybe we could oil anoint an offering of the goddess. I know that typically GGG has said, hey, we want to keep league mechanics outside of the lab, so I get that last one is kind of awkward. But what if we could do that? What if we could essentially anoint the various endgame bosses that already exist and then have a whole new experience with those bosses? Yes, it's a bunch of different things to interact with, and I understand the technical difficulties are there, and the limited timetable to produce new content is there. But if we're dreaming pie in the sky and saying, how could we improve Blight, these are some ways using the mechanics that are already present and introduced through Blight to improve the league and to allow for more accessibility, more replayability, but still keeping that element of the cost to it. We're not talking about going back to glacier farming with just Alk and Go and interact with the league mechanic. We're talking about a high cost, a relatively high cost, a bunch of oils that you've got to expend to then interact with the league mechanic. Okay, moving on. TX Flood said it would be okay if it wasn't for the constant crashing. Ironically, I have not had a single crash up until today after the latest performance patches came through. Like, the latest performance patch came through, and now I'm like, hey, I'm crashing. So I'm like, okay, not a single crash for me, the whole league, and then all of a sudden we're crashing. So funny that that's happening. Hopefully your experience has been better. Drop us a comment down below about how the consistency and implementation and performance for Blight has been for you. Venom Blade says, although Blight is an improvement over Legion, I can't help but feeling that they try to be too simple because people backlashed the start of Synthesis. In the start, a lot of the critique against Synthesis was fair, but they made some pretty good changes. Was it about maybe 1 month into the league? But people never gave it a second chance after the changes, which was sad, since at least in my eyes, it was the most enjoyable league experience I've ever had, and I finished 40-40 challenges there, while in Legion I stopped at 19 after receiving my totem, mostly due to the underwhelming feeling that the endgame league mechanics weren't profitable without Headhunter or huge investments. I do just want to talk about this for just a moment. This is one of the reasons why I think this discussion is important to have right now, like at the end of week 3, at the beginning of week 4 in Blight League. Typically, GGG spends about the first month-ish over the last year and a half. This has been kind of the development cycle once a patch has been released, once a new league has been released. They spend about the first month updating, changing, really getting on top of bugs, making adjustments to rewards, making adjustments to map drops and to availability of endgame content and the new league mechanic and of course the rewards that are attached with all of those things. Typically the first month is for all of those changes, and then usually GGG's pretty happy, and that second month they say, okay, great, we're done with this now. The team that was working on that can get back to whatever other projects were put on the back burner for the first month release of the league, and we can continue progressing and developing and moving on to the next league or to the leapfrogged next league, since they work in teams, in tandem teams that are now essentially working a league ahead of one another. So that first month of a league is really where the most changes happen. And so on the one hand, it's a bit of a bummer because the vast majority of the people that actually test and play a league, of course, happen within the first month. So the first month of a league is by far the most buggy part of a league. It's also, of course, generally the most exciting time of the league if you play in any of the trade leagues, because that's when everybody's on. That's when it's a fresh economy. That's when there's all the movement, money, and currency to be made from the various new league dropping and everybody starting at ground zero again. So on the one hand, it's great. It's exciting. There's a new league, and that's the cycle of things. But on the other hand, it's also when all the bugs and all the testing has to get worked out. And so when people leave during that first month, they don't actually get to see, like, hey, this is the most polished that the league is going to be, typically after 1 month. So it's a great point that Venom Blades brings up, and he's got some really great points on Synthesis, but I'm not going to chat about all of that here. Cute Doggo says, first league in years I didn't play, but it's more about build nerfs and not having an interesting build to do more than the league itself. This is the facts. This is the facts, right? GGG rotates what is meta. They rotate what is going to be the best, and we see that right now presently with the vast majority of players playing Necro and some combination of Zombie, Summoner, Spectre, whatever, right? That's just the vast majority of what most people are playing. And then we've got some Assassins in there and some Saboteurs in there. But GGG does rotate what is getting played, and that's just the reality of it at the moment. So if that's something that turns you off to PoE, unfortunately, I've got bad news for you. That cycle and that style of development probably isn't going away, at least until 4.0. Moving on to Venadian, I've always been pretty meh on tower defense games. Combine that with the absurd lag and crashing issues of Blight, and you have a league that I've hardly made time to play at all. A lot of people start the league and they're like, hey, I got to take days off of work and it's on a weekend, and so that's great, and then I'll, extend whatever vacation days I've got. I'll tell the wife and kids to get out of the house. I'm playing PoE for the first few days. And so I really feel bad for a lot of people that have done that, and their experience, especially with Blight League, has been inconsistent, and there have been a lot of crashes. That would absolutely be awful, to use your vacation time to enjoy a game and then the game doesn't work. It would just be a bummer. It reminds me of, and we've got a lot of different console users that are playing PoE now. So shout out to all of our PS4 and Xbox users that are playing PoE now. But it reminds me of, I was so excited. I got one particular game for my PS4 back when I had a PS4, and I was so excited to play it, and I had the whole day to myself. The wife and the kids were gone. They were traveling, and I had gotten all of my other honey-do list chores done. I was done with my work for the week, and I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this game. I inserted the disc into my PS4, and then it said downloading. And I was like, huh, that's odd. Now you'd think, oh, Iron, you're somebody that works in the tech industry. You should know that you'd have to download something that a game would be too big to actually fit on a CD. Yeah, well, I didn't. For whatever reason, I was in the mindset of, back in the PS2 days, I can just take a disc and insert that disc into the PS4 and we'll be happy. We'll play a game. I spent the whole day downloading the game, and I finally got to play it later on in the day. I eventually just took a nap and woke up when it actually was finished downloading. Okay, the doctor says, where's the meh option? Again, there's a lot of people that have said this, that maybe they're not necessarily in the love camp or the hate camp, but they're just kind of in the meh camp. I feel like I've addressed this, but just to reiterate on it, I'm not going to put a meh option on this particular type of poll, because if you feel meh, I would much rather you comment and say, hey, where's the meh option, rather than having votes pulled either way. I'd rather people don't participate in the poll if they don't love or hate Blight League. I just want to know, for people that are passionate on either side, whether or not they're loving or hating the mechanic. Richard says, I think the PoE community is a bit too entitled. The fact that we get such a deep game with consistent new content for free is mind-blowing, and I see myself continuing to play for a long time despite the small issues I encounter each league. Richard, I'm in the same boat as you in that regard, not thinking the PoE community is too entitled, but there's bugs, right? There are bugs, there are inconsistencies, there are problems with PoE. It's not a perfect game. It's a human design thing, and there's always going to be problems. That being said, I still love PoE. In every single league, I'm excited and stoked to come back, and I find myself dumping more and more of my free time into PoE each and every league. So I'm with you, not in that sentiment against the community, but rather in that sentiment of, I still love the game. Like, problems and all, warts and all, I still love the game, and so I'm with you on that. Gub says, I really enjoy the activity. I think it just lacks depth. The difference between playing Blight and Standard is pretty minimal, and that's a decent measure of a lackluster league. I will confess that this is one of the first leagues that I thought, I wonder, if I had access to all of this Blight stuff on my Standard characters, what would I do? What would I do, right? Because I could really, really push some blighted maps and some various blighted content. Some of the more challenging content, if you've got all of the currency in the world from all of your various leagues accumulated over in Standard, and you've got all the characters that you could ever want to play, again, at high level that you don't have to spend time leveling, accumulated over in Standard, what would that look like? And so it's got me thinking about playing Standard. And I probably will play Standard at some point, maybe towards the end of the league, maybe the last month of Blight League, I'll play a bit of Standard and interact with some of the stuff from people who have died in hardcore who are selling their stuff on Standard because they're not going to play with it. Maybe I'll do that during the last month of the league, just to see what it's like to play on some of my high-level characters with a lot of currency on Standard. Conte001 says, I enjoy the league mechanic, but I find it takes way too long to complete an event while mapping. I'd rather they have made Blight a currency that you discover in maps, kind of like Nico, and that you go somewhere else to face off against a blighted event, similar in scale of the event that happens on a blighted map, based on whatever difficulty a player wants to face off against. That way I can go there after I'm done and play tower defense game mode, just like how Delve is a separate activity. I think this is, again, a wonderful suggestion. This is something that they've done in the past, and I think the reason why GGG didn't want to do it in this scenario is because they didn't just want to copy another league. I think there are some folks who feel like GGG is just regurgitating old content, and even though they're not, that's not where I'm standing. Let me make that perfectly clear to you, YouTube. That's not where I stand. Some people think that GGG is just regurgitating old stuff and bringing it out with shiny new, new graphics and new clothing. I think each league has got its own very different, very unique mechanics. So I think one of the things that GGG didn't want to do was potentially rehash an old league mechanic and then update it with a tower defense theme. I think that's one of the reasons why they made that decision. That being said, I think one of the things that we are seeing happen actually right here in PoE 3.8 Blight League is actually more and more testing for 4.0. I think all of the leagues that we had building up to 3.5 was about testing the waters and revamping the Forsaken Masters. I think the same thing is going on right now in 3.6 with Synthesis, in 3.7 with Legion, and right now in 3.8 with Blight, and all the way until 4.0. I think all of this stuff is a test case, test basin to try and test stuff out for 4.0. So for instance, I think things like blighted maps are something that we could see. I think we're going to see an expansion style system to the Atlas, that we'll see another layer to the Atlas, almost like blighted maps that are just a whole other realm of maps that is added onto the depth of the Atlas that already is there. I think we'll see maybe anointing and the way how the passive tree works. We've already seen with Legion Jewels how GGG is essentially making it so that way passives can do multiple things depending on how you layer your jewels over top of the passive tree. So maybe some more depth to the passive tree, making the passive tree essentially 3D. That yes, there's the 2D version of the regular passive tree, but then when you add this jewel, it adds another dimension that allows you to essentially change and augment the passive tree that's already there. I think we're seeing that with anointments onto items, that we're seeing maybe some test case scenarios, maybe for lab enchants that everybody's been asking, hey, why can't we just go around and grab like an item that's an expendable currency and use that on a helm instead of having to run through the lab? I think we're seeing that. I think we are seeing the test case scenario for those scenarios with anointments and with oils being used both onto maps as well as, of course, onto items in order to give them certain passives. I think we're starting to see GGG test the waters with those sorts of things, and so we can kind of get a sense of where we're going with 4.0. We're not there yet, but I think that's what's going on with each of these leagues. Okay, as we wrap up the video, a couple more comments that I wanted to get to. Patty Brodie said, it's buggy, do Blight map worth 60C, plus get 4 times plus a boss portal, 1 inch from the pump, no biggie, big pathway spiraling around the map before it gets to the home tower. Halfway through the map and boss spawns instantly one-shotting the home tower directly in range because of its sides. Blight map failed. Can only happen once, right? 6 times over 23 maps. Oh, or the 4 bosses with stupid HP multipliers spawn at once from all directions, no biggie, just bad RNG, right? Oh, you tried 3 portals of 4 times fireball throwing goats yet? Classic stuff. First comes the lag, then comes the orange screen of death as you try and dodge out of the way of something coming from all directions. This is one of the reasons why Blight maps are terrifying me in hardcore. Like, I'm utterly terrified of Blight maps. The highest tier Blight map I think at this point that I have attempted is a tier 7. That's it. That's the highest that I've attempted in hardcore because I'm terrified. There's those fireball guys, there's the spore guys, there's stuff that I've seen streamers get killed on that you don't even see a particle effect. You're just dead instantly with like 6k life and you're just dead. So I personally in hardcore am terrified of this stuff. That being said, I'd love to hear from some of you, especially some of you that are playing softcore this league. How is it that you are dealing with these particular bosses? How is it that you are approaching? I know there's a bunch of different builds that are really, really effective for farming Blight. So if you want to share your build, that's fantastic. This is a video that's going to be coming up eventually when we go over some of the different builds that are good to farm on blighted maps and farm blighted encounters. But I'd love to hear from some of you specifically how you're dealing with some of the bosses and some of the more difficult encounters as you are engaging with the league mechanic and with Blight maps. Anyway, thanks so much to everybody that voted on the poll, and thanks so much to everybody that dropped a comment and their feedback. You can, of course, drop us a comment right here on the channel to let us know what your thoughts are and whether or not you're loving Blight or hating Blight. Again, I'm happy to hear if you think Blight is just kind of meh. I'd love to hear your reasons for why. Drop us a comment down below, and I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you in 3.8 Blight League.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.